John Prine, the beloved songwriter, the folk hero with that twinkle in his eye, and a catalog of songs that feel like old friends. He was known for his warmth, his humor, his generosity. This was the former mailman from Illinois who, as his friend, Chris Christopherson once said, wrote songs so good they'd have to break his thumbs. Bob Dylan said Prine's work was pure Proustian existentialism and that nobody but Prine could write like that. With a reputation for kindness and a legion of devoted fans and artists who adored him, the very idea of John Prine hating anyone, let alone another band, seems almost impossible. He was the gentle poet, the guy who saw the humanity in everyone, but behind that famously kind demeanor was a man with uncheckable musical standards and a wit that didn't suffer fools gladly. We dug through decades of interviews and biographies to uncover the artist that, in his own quiet way, John Prine just couldn't stand, and what we found was far more complex and, frankly, more interesting than a simple list of names. It turns out, John Prine's sharpest criticisms weren't for other musicians. He wasn't the type to get into petty feuds or public spats. Instead, his hate was aimed at something much bigger. He hated systems, he hated inauthenticity. He hated compromise when it came to the soul of a song. He waged a quiet war against the forces he felt were poisoning American music. So today, we're counting down the 6 things John Prine truly hated. And in doing so, we'll uncover the core principles that made him one of the most revered songwriters of all time. Coming in at number 6 is the one thing that defined John Prine's entire career, both in rebellion and creation: the major label. Hit-making machine. To understand Prine's bone-deep distrust of the corporate music industry, you have to go back to the beginning. After being discovered by Chris Christopherson, Prine signed to Atlantic Records in 1971 and later moved to Asylum. He spent the first decade of his career in the major label system, delivering critically acclaimed albums that gave the world Sam Stone, Angel from Montgomery, and Hello in There. But despite the critical success, Prine was never a comfortable fit. He wasn't a pop star. His voice, once described by a critic as being like poor quality sandpaper, wasn't made for slick radio hits. His songs, which dealt with the lonely, the forgotten, and the flawed realities of American life, were often too raw for the mainstream. He recalled how, when he first started playing songs like Sam Stone, the audience wouldn't even clap. They'd just stare. He thought it was because the song was so awful. It wasn't awful, it was just intensely real. And the music industry in the 70s was all about escapism and polish, not hard reality. The frustration simmered for a decade. Prine felt the labels just didn't know what to do with him, and he grew tired of their priorities. He watched them chase blockbuster rock acts and demand radio-friendly singles, often at the expense of artistic integrity. He saw brilliant songwriters get dropped or mishandled because they didn't fit a commercial mold. He was a visionary who didn't feel he was in control of his own work. So, in 1981, after his contract with Asylum was up, he did something radical. He walked away. He and his longtime manager, Al Bunetta, decided to start their own record label. It was a risky move, born not from a desire to build a business empire, but from a desperate need for creative freedom. They called it Oh Boy Records. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a declaration of independence. It was Prine putting his money where his mouth was. He famously said the idea behind starting the label was essentially, let's just do it wrong ourselves, rather than let a major label do it wrong for him. His wife, Fiona Prine, recalled that he would just throw out the idea, hey, let's start a record label, and his manager Al was the one there to catch that hot cookie. Oh Boy Records wasn't founded to make millions. It was founded to make music that mattered on their own terms. The label started as a humble mail-order operation. One of its very first releases was a Christmas single with Prine singing, I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus. The first full-length album, 1984's Asterisk Aimless. Love Asterisk was financed in large part by fan pre-orders. His fans would send in letters with $10 bills and checks, a testament to the deep connection he'd already built with his audience. One the major labels never truly understood. Over the years, Oh Boy Records became a haven for other artists, who didn't fit the Nashville mold, releasing music by Todd Snyder, Chris Christopherson, and Don Reeder. The label's mission, which the Prine family continues today, is to give songwriters a platform to create art and speak their truth. Prine always refused offers to sell the label, determined to stay independent. He hated the machine, so he built his own, more humane alternative. At number 5 on our list is something more subtle than a corporate machine, but in some ways more personal: the media caricature. Prine built his career on specificity, on capturing the nuanced, often contradictory details of being human. The last thing he could stand was being flattened into a one-dimensional stereotype. From the start, when a young Roger Ebert wrote the first glowing review of his work in 1970, the media was essential to Prine's rise. But with that attention came labeling. Because he played an acoustic guitar and wrote profound lyrics, he was immediately branded a folk singer. Because he was compared to Bob Dylan, he was often saddled with the new Dylan tag, a label he found both flattering and frustrating. Prine's issue wasn't with folk music. He deeply respected the tradition. He grew up on Hank Williams and was inspired by storytellers like Chuck Berry. His problem was with the box the folk label put him in. It suggested a certain political earnestness or rigid tradition that just didn't capture his unique, often surreal, and darkly humorous worldview. He bristled at being called a protest singer. After he wrote Sam Stone, his devastating portrait of a veteran with a drug addiction, many assumed he was a political writer. But Prine pushed back on this, suggesting that writing protest songs felt a bit like patting yourself on the back. His songs weren't political screeds. They were human stories. Sam Stone wasn't about the politics of the Vietnam War. It was about the personal hell of one man and his family. The hole in Daddy's arm wasn't a political statement. It was a personal tragedy. This resistance to being pigeonholed is a theme throughout his career. He famously said, "I don't concern myself with where I fit in. I just keep my head down and keep doing whatever it is I'm going." He hated the caricature of the serious folkie because it erased his humor, arguably his most powerful tool. As he put it, "When I'm writing a lyric, things can only get so serious before they start becoming humorous." This was the man who wrote, "Please Don't Bury Me," where his narrator dies and donates his body parts in the most comical way, and "Let's Talk Dirty in Hawaiian," a novelty song that became a fan favorite. These weren't the songs of a somber folk prophet. Aaron Osman, the editor of the book Prine on Prine, noted how the media often created a simplified perception of him, the gentle, folksy mailman, while missing the sharper, more complex man himself. Prine hated this flattening effect, this tendency to turn a real person into an easily digestible package. His genius was in seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary, and he resented it when anyone tried to file him away in a drawer labeled folk. He was too funny, too strange, and too deeply human to ever fit in a box. Coming in at number 4 is maybe the most intimate and surprising thing. John Prine hated the sound of his own voice. For millions of us, Prine's voice is the sound of comfort, truth, and an old friend telling a story. It's a voice full of character and lived-in wisdom. But for Prine himself, especially in his early years, listening to his recorded voice was an experience he found deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't false modesty. It was a genuine, visceral reaction. He started as a live performer, used to the noisy give and take of a Chicago folk club. The sterile studio was a different beast. He said listening to his old records just made him hear a young, extremely nervous fella, and it made him want to run out of the room. This discomfort was tied to a larger idea he pushed back against his whole career, the myth of perfection. The studio, with its endless takes and relentless pursuit of a flawless performance, was the opposite of Prine's entire philosophy. His music was about embracing the flaws and cracks that make us human. He wasn't a technically polished singer, and he knew it. He once joked, "I sound like that old guy down the street that doesn't chase you out of his apple tree." But that was the point. His voice was a tool for storytelling, not a pristine instrument. His hatred of his own recorded voice was also connected to his struggle with producers who wanted to clean up his sound. He wanted his records to sound like they were being played by real people in a real room, with all the scrapes and scuffs included. This tension between his raw style and the industry's demand for a perfect product was a constant source of friction. But out of this hatred, this deep-seated discomfort, came one of Prine's most defining philosophies. Unable to achieve technical perfection and unwilling to fake it, he turned his imperfections into his signature. This led to one of his most famous, oft-attributed quips: "If I make the same mistakes at the same time every day, people will start calling it a style." That single sentence perfectly captures his genius. It's a masterful blend of self-deprecation. Our goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to be real. We're halfway through our list, and as you can see, John Prine's dislikes were as unique and thoughtful as his songs. He was a man who stood for something, and the things he pushed back against tell us so much about who he was. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the real John Prine, take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It helps us keep bringing you stories that go beyond the headlines. Now, let's get back to the countdown. At number 3, we find another one of Prine's quiet frustrations, the impersonal, often bewildering machinery of music licensing. In a sense, this was his version of having an uninvited collaborator. He'd pour his heart into crafting a delicate, personal story, only to have it show up in a movie or a commercial, often in a context completely alien to the song's original. Meaning, this wasn't about Prine hating Hollywood or refusing to engage with other media. It was a critique of the industry's process, which often felt disrespectful to the art itself. He once summed up the reality of music licensing with his typical, blunt pragmatism, saying that you don't always get told your song will be in a movie. You just get paid eventually. That says so much. There's no outrage, just a world-weary acknowledgement of a system that treats songs less like cherished creations and more like interchangeable commodities. Imagine writing a song as intimate as Angel from Montgomery, a portrait of a woman feeling trapped and invisible, and then finding out it's been used as background music in a scene you had no say in. For an artist as intentional as Prine, this lack of control was a source of low-grade annoyance. His songs were his children. He'd raised them, and then they were sent out into the world to be used by strangers for purposes he couldn't have imagined. This frustration also ties back to his belief in the importance of context. Prine knew a song's meaning could be completely altered by its presentation. A song about loneliness could be twisted into something sentimental. A song about quiet desperation could be used to sell a product. This was the uninvited collaborator at work, the film director, or ad executive who could effectively rewrite the emotional meaning of his work. Without ever speaking to him, he didn't waste his energy on grudges. He saved that for writing the next song, but his comments reveal a deep-seated dislike for how the industry could devalue the very art it was supposed to celebrate. It was another example of the machine grinding away at the human element of music. In the end, his feelings about licensing weren't about money, they were about respect. Respect for the song, respect for the artist, and respect for the sacred connection between a story and its audience. He hated the impersonal system that could sever that connection, that could take a piece of his soul and turn it into background noise. This brings us to number 2, and it's a story that has become a legend in John Prine folklore. It's about a critic, a scathing review, and Prine's utterly unique way of dealing with negativity. The thing he hated wasn't the critic himself. It was the sting of a well-aimed barb, and maybe the sliver of truth that can hide an even the harshest criticism. The year was 1972. John Prine was playing a show at the Cellar Door in Washington, D.C. when a music critic from the Washington Star came to see him. To say this critic was unimpressed would be a colossal understatement. He wrote a review that was nothing short of brutal. The headline alone was a work of savage poetry, entertaining as a dog bite. The review was just as vicious, claiming Prine's melodies are so similar they can barely be told apart, and that his voice was like poor quality sandpaper. He dismissed the songs as all downers. For a young artist just starting out, a review like that could have been crushing. So what was Prine's reaction? Did he get angry? Fire back in an interview? Write a bitter song about a critic? Nope. John Prine did something much, much better. He laughed, according to his family. He found the review so hysterical that he cut it out, framed it, and hung it in his bathroom at home, where it stayed for the rest of his life. It became a badge of honor. He mentioned it in interviews, and his label, Oh Boy Records, eventually started selling t-shirts with the phrase "entertaining as a dog bite" on them. He didn't just take the punch. He turned it into one of his greatest. Punchlines. This story reveals something profound about Prine. He didn't hate the critic. In fact, his son, Tommy Prine, later said his dad thought the review was hilarious and that the line kind of sounds like something my dad would say. There was a shared wry wit. So what did Prine hate? He hated the idea of taking himself too seriously. He hated the kind of artistic ego that couldn't take a hit. But on a deeper level, he had a complex relationship with criticism. He once admitted, "If some part of the review is true, those are the ones that sting." This suggests his humorous response was also a brilliant defense mechanism. By laughing at the dog bite review, he diffused its power. He took control of the narrative and turned an insult into a piece of his own mythology. He even got the last word in his song, When I Get to Heaven. In it, he imagines a grand party in the afterlife where he forgives everyone who ever did him wrong. It was the ultimate Prine move, a gesture of magnanimity tinged with a little bit of a smirk. He understood that criticism was part of the deal, but he refused to let it define or embitter him. He framed it, hung it on his wall, and turned it into a reminder to always stay humble and keep a sense of humor. He hated the sting, but he loved the story, and so we arrive at number 1. The thing John Prine hated most of all. It wasn't a band, a producer, or a critic. It was something far more pervasive and, in his eyes, far more dangerous. The ultimate transgressor that John Prine spent his entire life fighting against with his words was hubris, insincerity, the kind of moral hypocrisy that allows people to say one thing and do another. This was the central enemy in Prine's work. His songs were weapons against it. He built his entire artistic ethos on radical honesty. He wrote simple, direct songs that aimed to scrape away the layers of pretense and ego that cloud our vision of the world. As one writer beautifully put it, his method was to scrape away the hubris, to write what felt like basic songs that sucker-punched transgressors with a wink. That phrase, sucker punched with a wink, is the key. Prine's fight against hypocrisy wasn't a joyless, preachy crusade. It was a witty and deeply compassionate mission. He used humor to expose the absurdities of human pride. Think of Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore. It's a critique of shallow, performative patriotism, but it's delivered with such a light touch it feels more like a friendly nudge than a lecture. He's not attacking the person. He's attacking the false piety, or Consider Some Humans Ain't Human, one of his later, more pointed songs. He takes aim at greed and cruelty, singing, "Some humans ain't human, some people ain't kind." It's a blunt assessment, but it's couched in a world-weary sigh rather than a scream of rage. He's expressing disappointment, not hate. He's just laying a sad truth bare for all to see. This hatred of insincerity is why he founded Oh Boy Records, to build a home for authentic music, free from phony commercialism. It's why he resisted media caricatures, because they were a flattened, dishonest version of reality. It's why he embraced the dog bite review as a stand against the fragile ego of the self-important artist. All these were battles in his larger war against phoniness. He believed music's sacred duty was to tell the truth, especially uncomfortable truths. His characters are flawed, broken, and often lonely, but they are always treated with dignity because they are real. From the lonely old folks in Hello in There to the heartbroken narrator of Far From Me, his songs are populated by people who have had their hubris stripped away by life. They are left with nothing but the plain, unvarnished truth. And it is in that truth that Prine finds beauty and grace. His life and work were a testament to the power of authenticity. He was a man who, in his own quiet way, became a moral compass. For American music, he never shouted. He never preached. He simply told stories, and in those stories, he laid out a world where kindness, empathy, and honesty were the highest virtues. The thing he hated most was the betrayal of those virtues. And his weapon against that betrayal was a 3-minute song, a wry smile, and an unflinching commitment to telling it like it is. So, did John Prine hate any bands? The answer, based on all the evidence, is almost certainly no. That kind of personal animosity just wasn't in his DNA. What we discovered instead is that John Prine reserved his sharpest criticisms not for people, but for ideas. He hated the corporate music machine that prized profit over art. He hated the media's tendency to simplify complex truths. He hated the myth of perfection, the impersonal nature of commerce, and above all, the moral cancer of hypocrisy. His hates weren't born of bitterness. They were the natural byproduct of his deeply held loves for authentic storytelling, artistic independence, humor, humility, and the flawed, messy, beautiful truth of the human experience. He built a legacy by saying no to the things that threatened his integrity. By walking away from the major labels, embracing his imperfections, and using his wit to puncture pomposity, he became more than just a songwriter. He became a standard-bearer. John Prine's story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful statement an artist can make is not what they create,